Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Creating Structure podcast. I am John Wheaton, your host, and today my esteemed guest, Arnold Swanborn, Design Principal, CO Architects. Arnold, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate the opportunity to converse with you and others in the field.
It'll be great. Thank you for joining us. I know you're a busy guy. You have a lot of responsibility, and it is one of my privileges on this podcast to, every so many episodes, have the perspective of the design architect or that any form of the architect or architecture, and how they inform design and how that impacts the building and the facade and other components of that. So it's going to be great. All of us who are engineers, or those who are in the trade, subcontracting, or general contractors, they don't always hear from the architect directly, or the design principal directly. So looking forward to it. So Arnold, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, when you came to the States, how you kind of got to this space?
Yeah. So I, as a young child, I guess, or early teenager, came to this country. I came from Holland, and came to the West. I landed in Santa Cruz and moved about 5 or 6 times when I was there, in about a span of 6 months before I went across the Sierra Nevadas and settled in Fallon, Nevada for my middle school years and high school years. Went from Holland, where it's nice and wet and kind of gloomy most of the time, to a place where it's 105 degrees and hot, dry. So it was a change, so to speak. Yeah. So, and from there, it's a small community. I'm not a farmer, although we had a farm. So I needed to get out. And I needed to get back to the big city. So I came to Los Angeles and studied architecture at USC, and really kind of planted my roots in LA for really since college. Went for a year, went to Columbia for a graduate school, but my wife from Beverly Hills wanted to come straight back here. So this is where I've been really my entire career. Okay, well, that's good to know.
I like your statement. You're not a farmer, but so your parents had a farm in rural Nevada. That's where you were living in high school?
Yeah, Dutch people are kind of gritty people. They like to say it's not good until it hurts. And farming's kind of like that. So you got to put your elbow grease into it, and it's digging ditches and making sure that the farm is running. That was part of the responsibilities growing up. And I think I've kind of brought that to the way that I practice architecture. It's a white collar job, but I kind of get my hands dirty in the actually making of things, and find real pleasure actually in getting my hands dirty and making, rather than directing others to do it. So that's kind of my approach to the work. It's really kind of very firsthand.
Thank you for that. You answered my question that I didn't even have to ask, which was, did farming, even though you're not a farmer, did that have anything to do with informing how you approach your work? And you just answered the question, so thank you. I'm not a farmer. I have a deep respect for farmers. And in fact, I didn't grow up as long as you did, but I grew up for 4 years on a 60-acre farm while my father worked as a metallurgical engineer in Minerva, about 30 minutes away in rural Ohio. And man, some days I'd like to just be back there running around with the dogs in the breeze, but it definitely informed my work because it's just a part of me, I just never forget it.
Yeah, I ran from it.
Right.
And it is their mindset, and it's like it's kind of like having kids. Your farm is never sitting. It's always there for you, right? You always have to mend or tend to it and take care of it. So it's never a break, so to speak. And that's rough. That's tough. I mean, I appreciate what farmers do for us, and the mentality it takes to actually make a farm economically sustainable, frankly.
Yeah. No, I hear you. That's really well said. And the Dutch farmers certainly have been in the news lately, but we won't go there because we're not about, that's not what this podcast is about. So you went to architecture school at USC?
Yeah, University of Southern California, yeah.
Okay, and then you said you spent a year at Columbia in New York City and then back to LA where you've been. By the way, sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot. It is your birthday today. Am I correct?
Yeah, it is, but you don't have to mention it. I got a year younger, right?
Oops, sorry, I just did. So everybody, backwards. By the time you see this, it'll be a few weeks, but happy birthday, Arnold. Great privilege to talk to you on your birthday. So just wanted to shout that out. My birthday is May 15th, so we're 2 days.
Oh, all right. Well, happy birthday to you as well then.
It's the best time.
Let's have a drink to that.
Best time. I would like that. Yeah. Okay. So you talked about as we get into your background and architecture, can you, where did you start when you took on your first architecture job? Did you work as a freelancer? Did you work as contract? Did you work at multiple firms? What did that ascension look like to design principle? And what does design principle mean to people?
So I was really fortunate. I mean, there's people that come into your life that have a really significant influence over you and kind of change the path of your trajectory of your career. I was fortunate enough to have a professor whom I worked for after I graduated, but that was introduced to in my second year of architecture school, Michael Lair, who was a really inspirational person in my life and really taught me the ropes of architecture. I don't think I knew exactly what I was getting into when I went to architecture school, but it became very clear that first semester that I had him. And then I had the privilege of working with him for about 3 years. Really small firm. He founded his practice probably 2 years before he started teaching at USC. So in a firm like that, you get to do a lot. It's a small firm, and you wear many different hats. You get to design, you get to go to job sites, you get to talk to contractors, you get to, pick up red lines for somebody that knows a lot more than you. So, a really, really, 3 years of really, really steep learning, and a lot of good work came out of that. And by the time I was done with that stint, the economy turned down. So his practice was slowing down a little bit, and it became an opportunity for me to go back and kind of investigate some things that I hadn't really investigated at USC, which was, it's a fairly structured sort of embedded in modernism. And I wanted to do some different things and be a little bit more speculative. And so I did that for a year before I came back to LA. That's kind of led though. I mean, that practice, everything that Michael does is all about design. And then maybe that's really taught me some bad habits. I still have them today. Fundamentally, design never stops for me. It's all for to make kind of inspirational places for people, to find calm in the work, really. I mean, the world's chaotic. And I think part of what we do as architects is try to find some order in that, try to create some calm in people's lives, because I think when people are in, let's call it kind of a Zen mode or in a peaceful place, I think they can be much more productive and much more innovative in themselves. So we're really creating places for people that at the end of the day need to do their work well for them to be successful. So that's where really that passion started.
Wow, thank you for that. I have a bunch of questions. It's so easy to podcast with people like you because your commentary brings on a lot of questions. I have one question. Just me go back for a second, because many have talked about this on the show, whether they were architects or not. Did you always want to be an architect, or did you figure out, I got to try something other than farming, and you fell into it? Did it find you, or did you find it? What did that look like?
Really good question. My father dabbled in architecture. As a kid, 4 or 5 years old, I think I spent 8 hours a day playing with Legos. Kind of coined a phrase called Legoing, kind of made a verb out of that. the idea of making and building has always been a part of me. But when I was in Nevada, the idea of Nevada, Fallon is currently at was the home of Top Gun.
Oh,
So it has a big Navy base, and lots of people come and go. But the idea of flying was always of interest to me. So I thought, well, maybe I'll become a pilot. Got the Navy here, maybe I'll do that. And then I said, well, that's like a short career. So yeah. I'll do architecture. So it's kind of a flip of a coin, basically. And it kind of stuck. It's like meeting the right people. I struggled. But my first year of college was not easy. I mean, I come from a small town of 4,000 people. My graduating class was bigger than that when I started. So, big fish in a little pond, a guppy in a really large ocean, sort of out of place to some extent. And it wasn't really until my second year where things really began to click for me.
That's very helpful to hear. I've mentioned this before, so I won't go on about it, but I was trying to decide between architecture and structural engineering, but I was a little bit intimidated by, at the time in the late 70s, the idea of just the artistry of it. And I was a little more comfortable with the rigor of mathematics. Did you have a bit of an artistic bent and background? Could you draw? Could you paint? Could you do all those things? Or was it more that you just knew how to put shapes and forms together? Do you remember that?
I think it came naturally because I was doing things that were creative, not necessarily in the drawing realm, but in the building realm, right? Whether it was, making things that would, whittling with my father in his workshop, or whether it was, tinkering around with the house and doing electrical work, or whether it was playing with Legos, right? I was always kind of making things. And then when it came to the ranch and I was building things, right? Build fences and all that sort of stuff. So, it was always about making and sort of the creative aspect of architecture and sort of what defines architecture and what makes it different than just other buildings. I don't think that really realized what it was until I came and actually studied at USC. So no, it wasn't apparent to me. I did some drafting when I was in high school. I did a playground for our local park with the local wood shop. And, that's kind of what I thought it was going to be. And I was happily surprised that I kind of stumbled into something that I really love to do. It's as much an avocation as it is a job today. So it's a passion of mine.
Yeah, that makes sense. Somebody said the other day, if to the furthest extent that you can, don't pick a job just for the money, pick a job that you can love. I don't know that I subscribe to I've never worked a day in my life. I love my work so much. I do love my work, but if I have to make money, I'd rather do this and be involved in the building and design realm than any other thing. So that's really good to hear from you. Thanks for your background about, did you always want to be an architect? I think a lot of us share a common bond with Legos. I would add, in my era, it was Lincoln Logs and Erector Set and Tinker Toys and Legos and all of the things. I just loved building things as well. So I hear you on that. You mentioned, we'll keep progressing into just design and what does design mean to you, but you mentioned two things. One, you said, I developed maybe some bad habits. I know, a little tongue-in-cheek, the design never stops, because you're talking about calm in the work, peaceful place, a zen-like state. You're trying to bring out an environment, I think I'm hearing, that brings out the best in people, because we live in a chaotic world. And so can you, and I know you said modernism is a big influence. So two things. What do you mean by the design never stops? And secondly, tell us what modernism means for those who may not be familiar with the term.
So the idea, think of a painting, right? When does a painter know when the painting is done? Well, it's just when he needs to go on to the next painting, right? Or somebody's said, I need it delivered at a certain time. Architecture and design for me is kind of similar. You work on it, you whittle away at it for as long as you have. And sometimes beyond the time that's given, right? architecture, we have delivery dates, we have contractors that need to build it, we have estimators that need to cost it. And, I've been guilty in some cases of pushing that a little bit too far, hitting the brakes too late, running out of room in the corner, so to speak. But I think what's in my career, what I've learned is that, if people understand where you're coming from, they're more attuned with what you're doing. They're a little bit more lenient with you. So creating relationships with those trade partners has been a really, really important part of how I've developed my career, to get to do what we all like to do and to find partners that have, I think builders and subcontractors and the people that we work with are as creative as we are. They just have maybe a slightly different point of view of it, and it's learning from them and engaging them and innovating with them that I've really found so really kind of, I love that. I really love that about, especially the place that I'm at right now. So when you talk about modernism, there's lots of different movements, and you go back through architecture. Architecture is what the second oldest profession in the world. And as you look, you go visit cities, there's been sort of architectural styles, and they've really, and over time, really depended on sort of craftsmen to do that work. In the age of industrial revolution, a lot of that craft was given to machinery, and craft became more difficult to find. And as a result, some architects started to think about buildings in terms of their spaces, not necessarily in terms of ornament, but in terms of abstraction. And modernism, in its kind of truest sense, is kind of the abstraction of space, using light in ways unforeseen. And ornament is now, while it's coming back a little bit, it's still in the guise of not everything's ornament. Everything is kind of to impact the spatial experience of that. So abstraction is really a part of modernism, and that's where I live mostly. But that doesn't mean that spaces are cold bad modern architecture in the hands of a bad architect can be incredibly stale. I think there's a richness. Good modern architecture can be incredibly rich, can be incredibly calming. I don't think going to a spa, those are places that have kind of a calmness to them, whereas you go to a cathedral, there's stuff all around, so there's kind of a very different sort of quality about the space types that we do now. The sacred and the divine, so to speak. So the early influencers, Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe and Frank Lloyd Wright, kind of sort of the icons of modernism. And, I think that's where my heart is, being Dutch. That's where Rietveld started in the early sort of 19 teens, kind of developing kind of very sort of abstract spaces and fluid spaces that, used to be just individual rooms. So it's kind of breaking out from the tradition, so to speak, of architecture into sort of a just more forward-looking architecture rather than backward-looking architecture.
That's very clear. Thank you for explaining that about the abstraction of space. Let me ask a follow-up. Are you saying that modernism in the hands of an inexperienced or less thoughtful architect can be very cold, but in the hands of a experienced and thoughtful architect, it can lead to just that more calming sense of space? Is that part of what you were saying? Yeah,
I that's right. And that's, I talked about the craft. I think the craft of the workmanship is still there, right? It still exists. It's just when you do very minimal things, it's the interface of particular elements have to be very precise for them to actually read correctly and to give that sense of calmness. And that requires as much detail and as much thought as doing something that's very ornate in nature. And, that's, if not done well, I think our modern architecture can fall very flat. And that's why, in some instances, it has a bad name. So yeah, it's the masters of it, they spent months working on very, very, very small details because it all matters. Can't hide it.
You know what? I won't, but I could talk the rest of the podcast on that one little phrase you just said, because it all matters. Everything matters, right? Like in life and business and in design, I love that statement. It all matters. Everything matters. I think a lot of times we don't recognize great architecture for how great it is because we're just inhabiting the space. You know what I mean? Like it's not like a great highway design is a bit of a boring design because it's safe and it's not unpredictable. And sometimes it's those little details in architecture that make a person feel a level of calm that they don't even think of. I think we understand better when we feel disassociated or upset or something's not right. But when it's right, I don't know that we always recognize how much of that is in the detail. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, maybe people don't know, but they get a sense.
Yes.
I think people, there are buildings that we've done or that I've worked on that are not intended for a wide audience, but they find it and they find a place that's where they want to have their cup of coffee. That's where they want to study or whatever they want to do there.
Yeah.
Because it somehow makes a connection to them. And so they may not know what it is. But there is an inherent kind of sense in people that they understand good architecture. That doesn't mean that everybody likes the same architecture, the same building type, but I think there are things that are more universal that people do connect to. I think people do connect to sense of daylight, the sense of community, the sense of sort of tactility that comes with doing a building well. I think they get it, and I feel comfortable in those spaces.
That's very well said. I agree with you. Thank you for that. Back on the, I always say, I pause sometimes because I have about 3 or 4 questions. My brain is working faster than I can, and I can't write much when I'm on these. I liked what you said. You said very transparently, like when you said the design never stops. Yeah, maybe I'm guilty sometimes of pushing that too far or tinkering too late. But you said, but the relationships I've built with the other people who are as creative as I am in a different way, that helps. So I really like to talk about relationships in this context in the podcast too. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying people will give you more grace because they understand through the relationship who you are and how it's helping to maybe make a better product in the end. You're finding that the relationship gives you more flexibility to be who you are in that space?
Yeah, I think people that understand where you're coming from and understand a point of view, and over time with whom you've built some trust, understand that at the end of the day, you're not going to leave them hanging. I think, if you just meet somebody and somebody's doing something you don't want to do, then you'll get kind of upset and frustrated because you're not getting what you need from them. But, what the design process allows, especially in sort of the new world of design build or design assist or those types of new delivery methods, it allows you to work with a group of people to establish trust over the process and over time that, I understand what their kind of points of views are and what their missions are, and they understand mine over time. And then in that time that you have together, you can establish kind of some rails to fit within, but you can kind of investigate, and it goes both ways. I did a project in Arizona in which we wanted to use copper because this building for a new campus in Phoenix, they wanted to have an icon in Phoenix, and they wanted to use materials that was of place, and copper is one of the 5 C's in the founding of Arizona.
Oh.
And so we worked, initially we wanted to work with the fancy guys that were in Minnesota, and then we worked with a local contractor, and what we learned is that, they were really wanting to innovate. They were growing a business, they were growing a practice in, they'd done metal roofs, they were starting to do the metal facades, they were getting into glazing, doing all sorts of stuff. And because we were kind of at the right time, at the right place, in their growth, we were able to work a facade that emulated the mountains through shade and shadow in a way that had we not met those people, we would have never been able to do that. So that going to their shop, they come to our shop, understanding what their limitations are, and them kind of saying, well, if we buy this machine, we can do this and we'll have it forever. They invested, we invested. It was a really just an amazing relationship, and the building's been awarded a lot. It's been an incredibly good experience for everybody, including the end user. So those processes, I think they kind of leave lasting memories of what a great relationship can look like, and that's what you always strive for in all the projects, because at the end of the day, I don't want to look backwards. I always want to look forward. I want to innovate. I want to experiment with new things, and I want to find partners that want to do that with me.
That's a great example. Are you able to name the project?
Yeah, that was Health Sciences Education Building in Phoenix, Arizona, for the University of Arizona. We subsequently did a lab building that was really initially part of the project, but was delayed for some time. So we've done 2 projects in the same copper skin, very affordable at the time because they knew the market. They bought the copper in the futures market at a time when it's really low. So we were, that was just in a time when it was a pretty tough time economically, 2008, 2009. That was a really great project to complete with them.
Yeah, that sounds like it. I'll come back to copper. I've done some copper work, and it is a beautiful natural substance. So I have a lot of questions about, you just gave us a great example about being informed by and informing the trades and other suppliers and contractors. But before we go there, you mentioned to me when I was getting to know you just a little bit that projects are connected to place. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think you tried to say that you don't just take your architecture and force it on a client or on a space. You try to let the space help inform your approach to architecture and the modernism and the abstraction. So where do you start? Because eventually, you start the process and you're saying that projects are connected to place. You have no preconceived notion on what it should look like. So how do you let it take its form? And then eventually that's going to help inform the facade. And we will want to talk a little bit more about facade, not specifically, but not exclusively, but in part. So how do you develop that?
Part of it's time, right? Trusting a process over, I don't think I was there when I, first came out of school, but over time, you learn a process and you learn to trust the process. And coming in with preconceived notions is, it's not, especially in the work that I do now, which is for universities and lots of institutions, it's for it to be lasting and enduring. It needs to have a connection to their mission and its the place in which it is. That's kind of, for me, kind of the fundamental kind of sustainable aspect of design, is that if you create buildings that are wonderful and in great places and they're thoughtful and they belong where they are, they have a much better chance of living a long life and not being demolished. So part of it's that. It always starts by listening and kind of researching. I work in lots of different markets and places I don't live. So researching is actually being there on the ground, and it's going and reading books about the place and understanding its local climate, its local economic history. And wherever I draw my inspiration from a whole host of different places, but it's always kind of it's from that place. That's, if it doesn't come from the place, then it's like well, I can build a glass building anywhere, and should we really be building glass buildings in the middle of the desert? Probably not. They're not very insulating. So, so those, I sort of have some fundamental things that I think about, that when I start a project, but, at the end of the day, it's like, it's listening and doing some research and fact finding before you really sort of put your pen to paper. That's where I start. Everybody's design process is different. It doesn't work for everybody, but that's what works for me. So,
yeah, thank you. That's helpful. So I was going to ask you where you drew inspiration, but it sounds like a lot of it is situational based on the project. But in a bigger, broader sense, and then I'll come back to specifics. Have you drawn any other inspiration for your architecture, your approach from any other cultures or any other places, or it all has been informed by kind of this modernistic approach and the experiences you've had along the way?
There are things that are tenets in the work that I do. The form in which they take varies from project to project, but I'm from the Low Country up in Northern Europe, where there is a kind of a lack of kind of really good quality light, generally speaking. So my architecture is very much informed by the way that light enters a space. If you think, some of my inspirations are Dutch artists like Vermeer, or, some of the churches from, the Renaissance and Baroque churches that, where light over the surface just surprises you, and there's a sort of sense of delight about it. So that's really kind of part of all of my work. And sometimes that's about light entering a building. Sometimes that's about light raking over a surface to make pattern, right? It's not best. So it's using light as a material has really been part of almost every project that I've pursued. I am, while I like abstraction and I like modern architecture, I also think that places that people inhabit have to be warm, rich, tactile, and sometimes those two things are kind of opposed to one another. So finding a language, an architectural language in which both of those can live is also part of very much true in most of the work that I do. So those are things that are really kind of fundamental to me. I think it's important as architects to be stewards of the earth, to do buildings that are performative, but also more than that, we don't want to tear them down. So making buildings that are smart, that are what I call kind of more open-ended and flexible and adaptable over time, because we know that programs will change. We can see the office market today, right? They're kind of tanking. So office buildings are actually pretty good for that, right? Because they're generally spec, so they're not made for a specific use, so they can be transformed. But the buildings that we do, or what I do, which is mostly sort of educational work and healthcare work, those buildings also need to flex over time. So that, for me, that's a constant that building infrastructure becomes really critical to that, and making sure that it's not everywhere, but it is kind of located in a way where we can rearrange spatially the interior of the building if we need to, without having to gut it or demolish it because it doesn't work for another function. So those are tenets that, those few tenets are part of every project I do, but they're not specific to a particular place. That's just something that I bring to everything that I work on.
Very helpful. Very, very helpful to hear your philosophy and how that informs. I like your comment about being stewards of the earth. Amen to that. That's really good. I agree with you. Stewards of the earth, and how best can we keep it sustainable and flexible and adaptable and transferable and all that? We're not just working for ourselves, we're working for future generations, always keeping that in mind, future generations of our family and future generations of other families. So yeah, we really appreciate your thoughtfulness. I'd like to ask some specific questions, jumping around a bit, but just some specific questions about facade, since you mentioned light and the use of light and how that's a piece, but yet how projects are connected to place and such. So, I don't know how. I've got to ask the right question here. The facade is the defining architectural aesthetic of the building, right? We know a building by the building skin, the shape and form and such. And there's certainly many other components when we go outside. But when we're looking at it, there's there's aesthetics and there's performance and there's different materiality and all those things. How soon, and if this is a bad question, you can work around it, but how soon do you start developing your kind of picture of what the exterior is going to look like? And how soon are you bringing in a trade subcontractor, material to help inform that design? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it's not I don't think it's an answer that's the same for every project that you do. Sometimes solutions come to you quickly, and sometimes they take work to get to. But I mean, I'm going to talk about the Arizona project or projects that are, because I think there's so many stories in there that I think are relevant to your audience. That project, I'll call it HSEB, the Health Science Education Building. It was founded on an idea of sustainability and creating a building that works for the desert, but it was fundamentally saying that what's the new vernacular that works in an urban setting in the desert climate? And that's where that really started from. And like I said before, for me, how do you connect it to very specific place, very specific cultures? And if that building specifically was built to train medical education, future doctors, nurses, and pharmacists to stay in Arizona. So how do you do that? And how does a building help you do that?
Yeah.
So we took a walking tour in the desert. It's not the place where you generally would start, but a tour of kind of a place just to hang out and find what the place is about and what kind of places you find when you do that. So, Arizona is just I lived in the desert in Fallon, Nevada, and it's not a special desert. But the desert around Tucson and Phoenix, the Sonoran Desert, is quite a beautiful place and lots of richness within it. So, the canyons, the swept canyons, they sort of go back to the history of the indigenous people that lived there, that learned how to work the land, how to find shelter in a really, really extreme arid climate. So understanding and learning from that became the basis of the architecture. So the architecture is basically two wings that are connected, what we'd call a mixing bar, where all the students come together. So kind of a leg with two things that are pronging off of it, and that's where all the educational spaces are. But they're separated by a very small, narrow space, it's a little bow tie shaped space, what we call the canyon. And that was becomes the pre-function space for all the large lecture halls. It was an outside space.
Right.
But the space was created because we walked through canyons, and we found that when you walk through canyons that are really tall, and they're obviously made out of stone, so the inside of that is actually a cementitious material, but they absorb the heat, and it cools the place. So being in that particular place with some engineering work to go with it is about 25 degrees cooler than it is outside of that place. Wow. So that came from working and understanding the environment, working with engineers that had an interest in making a place like that. So we used our once through air. We put it back, the relief air in that courtyard, so it was basically free. It was going to go out to the roof, or it was going to go into the courtyard. So instead of spilling it into the roof, we put it into the courtyard space. We put a sail over the top of it so that it became effectively, you don't get direct sun in, but we get really, really beautiful light that comes all the way down through the space. Good. So it became, and that took a big body of what was, maybe a 150-foot deep building, and it put a big courtyard effectively in the middle of it. So they have two wings that are actually really well daylit. and they were all oriented north-south and not facing east-west. So a very sort of an approach which was very much about that place, and also connected to university, to the students, hopefully keeps people there because they see the building kind of engenders the place itself.
Yeah.
So, and then the skin, it was made, it was folded in kind of unique and different ways to emulate the mountains and sort of the sedimentary rock that you find in Arizona. And it uses light to do it. It doesn't use different colors. It's one material. It's all one material. It's just this beautiful light that kind of creates that space. So yeah, just a project that has so many different stories about how you can connect to a place and find something new if you kind of really put your mind to it.
Yeah, that's really great. And that's just one example I know of probably many, but I like the tactileness of that. It's kind of one of the things you said earlier, and it sounds very, quote, organic, even though that's maybe a coined phrase. So on the building skin, let's talk about that particular project. Did you use stone, glass, metal? Like, what did you use for the skin?
So the skin was copper.
So that's the one that was copper.
That's primarily copper.
Was that over like a rain? Was that like a rain screen wall?
Yeah. So what we did for that project is it doesn't rain much in Arizona, so it's rain screen technology. But if you look at deserts, not our deserts, but the Middle East, and like they use sort of solar chimneys to cool places down. So what we did with that particular skin, we gave it a little bit more space between the insulation and the copper material, which is a great conductor. Skin heats up a lot, so it creates a great convection. So we created what I call a sunscreen rather than a rain screen, because what it really does, it's a secondary skin that's over the top, and it actually cools. It wicks away all the heat from the building, and it vents it out of the top like a chimney would. Nice. So not only is it good looking, but it also kind of was engineered in a way, and kind of innovated in a way to do way more than that and be more sustainable and passively sustainable, right? We're not doing anything that requires mechanisms or dampers to open things up, but to passively cool the building. Wow. It's been very successful from that perspective as well. So, lots of new things that we did when we had time to do things when the profession was a little slower. We had time to think about our projects.
Well, but that also, I think that speaks to your point about adaptability and longevity and sustainability, because if it's not driven by mechanical systems, if it's a natural form of convection and stuff, then it's certainly got a much better opportunity to survive a lot longer and be a natural part. What about the glass and glazing? Do you get into, obviously you get into it because you're using light, informing light, whether it was that building or otherwise. Are you using, glazed curtain wall systems ever? Are you using punched opening skylights, ribbon windows? What kind of glazing systems do you get into?
All of the above. Depends on the place, and it depends on the expression, and it depends on, to some extent, it depends on the budget and the contractors you're working with. I used to think that curtain wall was more expensive than window wall, but it depends. It depends on the situation. So I've learned. So, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I've done traditional buildings, and I'm still doing traditional buildings in a way, but I try to find a way to abstract them a little bit. But even there, the glazed areas are generally curtain wall or window wall. Generally try to stay away from punched openings as much as I can. But, they sometimes happen as well. But it's really about the glass specification and kind of how you can use depth in walls to self-shade and to try to, for me, it's about having some connection to what happens between inside and outside. And it's during the day, buildings generally appear dark when you look at a glazed surface. So it's where you bring the natural light in on the back side of that allows you to see through a building and to actually see and to make the activity that's in the building come alive. So skylights, especially on shorter buildings, are very, very helpful for that, right? So they allow you to see through buildings even during the day, not just at night. And trying to get the glass as clear and as low and low E coating as you possibly can get away with. Try to do passive solar things that allow the glass to be clear, because we know that low E really is very successful primarily when the sun hits it. So trying to keep the sun off the glass allows you to make a much clearer building. And so systems aren't as much the issue to me. It's about the clarity of the glass that I'm trying to get to, so there's not so reflective or not so dark. So that
I see.
The activity of the building is kind of part of the life of the campus, the life of the city, rather than just an inanimate object.
Interesting. So are you using overhangs and sunshades and such to try to get you want as much visibility from that glass as possible?
Yeah.
I like that. How soon do you bring in, I guess again, I know it varies on the job, but do you have design charrettes sessions with glazing sub panels? So do you sit down with them and say, tell me how you'd like to build this? Here's my idea. How does that happen? Do you collaborate in that manner?
I do. And it takes different forms and different projects. I generally like to have a bit of an idea before I get them involved. I think that's where they're more comfortable, frankly, generally speaking. I don't want to say this, hopefully this come across wrong, but, contractors like to build, and sometimes the iterative process is very frustrating to them. So we want to bring them in at the right time, not too early and obviously not too late when they can't have any impact on the way things are done.
Yeah.
But, on the copper skin that we did in HSCB, we had the sub involved, I think, as early as the beginning of design development. So the idea had been kind of fermented and it started to settle. And they were very, very helpful in terms of moving it forward and telling us what the limitations of their equipment were so that we can design within their limitations. And then they did mock-ups for us. So, that was done in the beginning of DD. I think that's generally when we would start with them. We've had in design builds, we've had them on board as early SDs.
Wow.
But then and that's on really fast projects, right? So you design something in 3 months and you're starting to execute it the moment you win it. So there's not a lot of time to think. I mean, that's when, you're really relying on your past to kind of come up with something pretty darn quickly.
Yeah.
And you're not doing a heck of a lot of innovation, I don't think, at that point. You're just trying to win the thing and move on with it. So in those instances, we've, worked with brick people, we've worked with glazers as early as schematic designs.
Wow. Thanks for that. Tell us about CO architects. How big is CO architects? Or maybe that's not the right question. What does CO architects do? What's your role like as a design principal at CO architects? Are there other design principals? Are you the senior design principal? Talk to us about CO architects and your work at CO architects, just overall the culture and how it's built.
So yeah, it's co-architects.
I'm sorry, co-architect.
That's a co-architect. That's fine. We're a practice. We've been around for 38 years. And we started as really an offshoot of Anshin and Allen. And our founding principals worked on the Salk Institute. So our work has always been kind of rooted into sort of the mission-driven work.
Yeah.
In the beginning, early days, that was all science, technology, lab buildings. Quickly became hospitals. One of our earlier principles came from sort of the healthcare profession. And then about 20 years ago or so, we started to get into medical education. And those three prongs are arguably our largest market sectors, but we work in in civic work, we do K through 12 work, but it's all for, generally speaking, it's for clients that own the buildings, that don't sell the buildings. We do very, very little developer work, although we are doing some life sciences developer work right now. Our practice is grew over the pandemic about 30%. So we're about 160, 170 people today in 2 offices. We have an office in LA and we have an office in San Diego. Our headquarters or our big offices in Los Angeles. And we have, we're an interesting company because we're kind of a company that's built in perpetuity. It's it's kind of a caretaker of the office as an owner, making it just like the architecture. Also, the practice hopefully will be around for future generations, and that's a very carefully transitioned office from that perspective. So because of our market sectors, there's a lot of expertise that's required. So we have 12 principals in the practice. They're primary shareholders, and most of them I would call subject matter experts, either healthcare, medical education, or science technology. And then there's 2 of us that are sort of primary. Our swim lane is design. So there's no senior principal of designers. Fundamentally, we're all architects. We're all learn how to design in school, and we've done it through our entire careers. And my focus is that. So while other principals' focus may be more program or technically driven. So we're generally approach projects as teams rather than as individuals. And it's generally a project, the sizes that we do them are led by 3 or 4 principals, heavily involved in the work, and as a principal group, very focused on mentoring the younger generation to take our place.
I'm taking notes. I like how you said it's a practice set up, it kind of to be run in perpetuity for future generations, which again, that sounds like it's true to who you are and who you collectively are as architects and the way you design buildings. So I find that there's a lot less tension in life when our words and thoughts and actions personally and collectively align more and more. That's a real blessing, because then there's less and less tension and conflict to have to deal with. The practice, okay, I had a question. What was the question? Bear with me for a second. So co-architects, I have lost my question. Well, that's what you get in a podcast that is not scripted. Okay, so I know what the question was. How in the world did you grow 30% during the pandemic? Because a lot of companies cannot say that. They lost people, and the flywheel effect was 6 months, 9 months, 12 months into the pandemic. Now, all of a sudden, they're down 20 or 30 or 40%. They're having to rebuild. Is there... how did that happen?
There's probably a couple of things that I could point to that had a big impact. At the end of the day, it's a bit of a luck of the draw, right? We're working in industries that during the pandemic were robust, in science, technology, and healthcare.
Yeah.
Both in the research and then sort of the healthcare delivery. So that was happening. And California has a lot of that growth was really done on the back of kind of the need to upgrade hospitals as well. So in California, we have to seismically retrofit all of our hospitals by 2030. That date has moved many times over the last decades, but that's the latest. So there's work that needs to be done, and it takes in California anywhere between 4 to 7 years to do that work. So time is getting short.
Yeah.
So there was some of that. We have, because there's so much lab work out there now, we have positioned ourselves from a marketing perspective in a place where we could actually pursue a lot of lab work. We had invested in people in the practice that could take that work on, that could lead that work and lead that work from an innovative perspective, here to differentiate ourselves to some extent from what is really what I would call a purple ocean at best, in terms of there's a lot of competition out for that work. And our infrastructure as a practice, because we work all over the country, was really easy to adapt to go remote. So we went
going to ask about that. So that was a component to it?
Yeah, we went remote, in a day, March 15th, I think it was, or 16th of 2020. And it was, I would say, I'm sure some people in the office sweated bullets, but it was not felt by the larger practice as a whole. We were able to really easily transition from, everybody being in the same place all 9 to 5 in one office to everybody working remotely. We helped people. We provided some stipends for people to buy some equipment for their homes, whether it be cameras, monitors, chairs, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. But yeah, from an infrastructure and a backbone perspective, it was very easy to transition.
Wow, that makes sense. The market, the work typology, that makes sense. But what is your mix now? Because I know this is a topic that is discussed and important in almost every podcast we talk about it. Like from business, did a lot of people stay remote? Is everybody hankering to get back in the office? Is it 80-20? Like, do you guys prefer to have people collaborating in office, or does it just work? Depends on the context.
It depends on who you talk to. And maybe it depends to some extent how old they are. We did a lot of good work during the pandemic. But if you ask me, did the work get better because we were working remotely? I can't say that because the proof's not out there yet. And we'll find out in the next few years as things go into construction and get built. I think fundamentally, and this is who I am. So I connect with people on a one-to-one basis and face-to-face basis much better than I do on a screen or on a phone or 100 people. So being together in the office, with a team, we're an office that's very much focused on our team. We're not studio-based. The team is really the fundamental building component of the practice. So you're always with your 7, 8, 10 people that you work with.
Yeah.
That environment and being able to mentor and train, especially younger people who are just coming out of school, you learn so much by just hearing.
Yeah.
We're hearing conversations, and you don't get any of that when you're sitting at home by yourself in your own, sometimes in your bedroom or in your dining room or wherever you are. So, for me, if I could have people in the office 5 days a week, that'd be great. I'm at the office 5 days a week because I just want to get away from home, and I don't want to separate my home life from my work life. And I really like the work, the shredding and the work together in person. That's not for everybody. And I understand that, a pandemic has proven that we can work remotely, and especially with people that have younger kids, that have people that are taking care of families, and there's sort of circumstances that take them to a place that, driving in, and especially in LA, where that might take 45 minutes each direction and take them away from home. And, that's difficult. So, we're finding our balance. We have a policy, 3 days in the office. We do that Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Like to start the week up together, and have Wednesdays off in between so that we have some time, people to work, and then come back and talk about the work again on Thursday. So that's what we're doing. We're re-upping that again to the end of the year and see where things take us. But yeah, there's some people that want to work remote full time, and we do have people that moved during the pandemic that do work remotely.
Yes.
And some of them are very successful, and some of them are less successful, and that really goes to the personality. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type of proposition. This really depends on the personality and what they want to get from it and how much they want to put into it. Because the communication becomes the key element, and not everybody's the great communicator, or making sure that everybody understands what page they're on. So that's, we've had people that are very successful at it and people that are struggling with it.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful, very insightful in my opinion as well. That's not a one size fits all. I do find that the younger a person is, or let's say the less experienced a person is, the more they benefit from being in the office at least 3 or 4 days a week. And I do agree with you. We've talked about that a lot here. I know I benefited from it when I was younger. Sure, I would have liked to have the opportunity when I was 25 or 30 to work from home. That wasn't an option back then. But boy, that better caught than taught, that overheard a conversation, or just almost subliminally, like you're picking things up that you may or may not even be aware of.
Yep.
And it's an immense value. You can't design a training program that can accommodate that. You just can assign people to mentors and teams. But even if you're assigned to a mentor, like they're busy, you're busy, and now you're with this team and you're hearing stuff and you're hearing it. I think the collateral benefit that you're referring to, just the organic collateral benefit of being in office, is hard to measure the benefit of it. It's definitely helpful. But agreed, there are people that are very successful. I know I talked to one principal architect on a few sessions ago, and he said about 80% of their people are in office. They're 160 to 200 people. Mm-hmm. He said the 20% that aren't, he goes, they're all experienced architects or landscape architects or designers. And he said they can't, in their culture, they can't let 6-month experienced architects work from home because they won't make it. It's not fair to them. But he said some of their senior project managers and working architects, they're way more efficient at home, and they know the company and they know the culture so well that they just bring them in every once in a while. Like you say, it's very situational, but the more experience, certainly the better off. I know we have consultants as well, design consultants, senior design consultants, and they're almost entirely remote. They rarely are in the office, and because they know how to function without. So it is contextual.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the creative process for me has always been an in-person process. And it's an unlearning of a process. Or relearning a process in a way that as older, we get set in our ways and we have to be a little bit more malleable. Yeah, certainly I understand especially with housing costs and times to commute, people can only afford to live further out. So
yeah,
so it's a big part. I mean, it's an issue in San Francisco. It's an issue in LA. And in LA is probably worse because it's just not connected with the transit system like New York or Chicago or San Francisco. Yeah. It's much more vast and it's not connected at all. So we have to be flexible, and we're trying to do that and try to hold on to our culture, which we really, really want to foster. So
it's very helpful to just thank you for that. It's very helpful to hear a little bit about the business of architecture, the business of your design profession, and it makes a lot of sense. I know that'll resonate with many. And I also we're really coming to the end of our time. I haven't prefaced that enough, but I really liked, you just dropped a little gold nugget there. The older we get, the more set we get in our ways. We need to, I guess, be disrupted. You didn't say it that way, but I'm paraphrasing it. It's good to hear opposing views. And I'm going to defy some of the Twitter bros and some of those other, and the camp that now says, I mean, this is completely off topic of architecture, but when you said that, I do agree in you're the thought product of the 5 people, let's say, you spend the most time and invest the most in. And it is important to increase your energy, but I don't agree with limiting myself to only being around the people that think like me and are like me and make me feel good. I want to be around a diverse group of people. I want to be around people that have been through a rehab program, or they were homeless once and now they live in somewhere, or they're struggling through something, or they see the world completely different from me. I don't grow I need the comfort of somebody who can identify with me, but I don't want to do that exclusively because that's just boring to me. You know what I'm saying?
No, you're 100% right. I mean, I think cultural diversity and diversity in general is diversity of thought. Diversity of experience means diversity of thought, and diversity of thought gives you a lot richer life experience. And that, from our perspective as an architect, as a practice, that's what we want. We want richer life experiences for ourselves, for the buildings that we do, for the people that will inhabit them. And so, yeah, we're a culturally diverse office. We're 160 people. I think we have 24 languages or so in our office, and people come from near and far. Yeah. So it's a very diverse office, and we've made a point of making sure that it is.
Good for you. That is really good to hear.
Interesting. You talk about kind of the disruptors and making sure that, because I think the industry as a whole is just going to change so much over the next decade or decades.
I agree.
With robotics, AI, 3D printing, and if we're not nimble and diverse, we're going to find ourselves to be dinosaurs, and we're not going to be around forever. So it's a part of kind of almost a survival instinct in a way today.
I find even at 63 years old, yes, I'm 63 years old, people, it makes me feel younger being in the position I'm in, the level of responsibility I'm in. Number one, having people who are 25, 30, 35 around me, they're dragging me deeper into the 21st century. And I'm reasonably savvy for a 63-year-old, but I'm still a 63-year-old. But also just that, I don't call it a threat, the disruption of AI and tech and all the other things, and just a culturally diverse group. I find it highly energizing. And I know we could do a whole podcast just on AI, but I was listening to Kevin Kelly this week, and Kevin Kelly, who from Wired Magazine, and he's been a really great futurist, KK, they call him in China. He's really well known. And I liked what he said about AI. Of course, who knows? But he said, I'm not worried about AI, because he said AI can do a lot of the base level work to put the bullet points or the formative thoughts together, but I get to decide how I'm going to interpret and manifest it in, whether it's a written article or a built something, and it's just as an augmentation. It's like we were all told 20 years ago that computers were going to put everybody out of a job. It's not true. There's more work now than there ever was before.
Yeah. Well, one thing about technology, if you fight it, you'll lose. You have to embrace technology.
Yes.
You have to learn to work with it. You have to adapt. You have to change your ways. And from a point of view of an architect and a person that, is very much in the ideation of things, we look forward. We use all the resources that we have as a way to project forward. AI is nowhere near there yet. It can only look backwards yet. So it's not artificial intelligence as much as it is machine learning, which is
machine learning.
You can't learn from the future because it hasn't happened yet. So the human capital is still there, and it's going to allow us to do better things more quickly, I think.
I agree.
And get further along. So it's an interesting time, an interesting place.
I like what you said. If you fight it, you're going to lose. Period. End of story. Fight the microchip in the internet. You're going to lose, dude.
Yeah.
So, Arnold, we are kind of really at the end of our time, and I could go on and on with you, but I want to respect your time and the audience's time. How about, I always ask this towards the end, how about you, the human, an architect and who you are as a lot of that, but is to the level that you're comfortable talking about, like, is there anything you do outside of architecture and work, that hobby, recreation, like, do you garden, do you run, do you bicycle, do you like to sip coffee with your family? Like, do you have any routines or mindsets that you do? Like, what kind of other things do you do?
Well, I find it healthy to have a balance between thinking and not thinking. As a young person, I was a student athlete. I ran track at USC. So I stay athletic. I like I live in a climate that is, and the reason I live in LA partially is because the climate is such that I can be outdoor most of the year. So I like to take advantage of the outdoors. I cycle, I run,
Good for you.
long bike rides. There's hills, there's oceans, there's mountains, I can ski, I can go to the beach, and I could do that all in one day. I'm an outdoors person, and if my kind of Zen time, I would say, is actually in my garden. I build buildings and at the end of the day, they're inanimate. You build them and they are what they are. A garden is like a child. It needs constant attention, and it changes over time. It surprises you. It frustrates you sometimes, but just getting away and, even if just pulling weeds, it's actually good downtime. It refreshes the brain, and you can come back refreshed. So, those are the things that I like to do. I mean, I like to read, do crossword puzzles. I like coffee and wine. And I can be found at a bar a lot.
That's great.
Socializing over some microbrews is not a bad thing to do. So I like to do lots of things, different things with different people, different groups of friends. Different groups of friends give you different perspectives on the world, which is always kind of engaging to me. So,
thank you for that. Yeah, it's very energizing. I find. I ran track and cross country at Akron U, so we'll have to talk about that sometime.
Oh yeah, what did you run?
I ran the 1,500 meter in 5,000, and then of course cross country was 5 mile and 10K.
Yeah,
it was and you talk about gardening, which I've taken up more lately. I say, the 1,500 meter is a quick death. The 10,000 meter is a slow death. Gardening isn't even. Digging and shoveling and weeding and planting is an even longer death. Like that is, like in marathoning, I had to really slow down the pace. But in gardening, if I approach it as a sprint,
you die.
You've got to just take it easy and lean on that shovel every once in a while, or you're going to die early that day, right?
And bring it right back to my days of digging ditches in Fallon, Nevada. Yeah, you learn that quickly. You don't. You got a whole day to do this in 104-degree heat, so you should take your time.
Yeah. I listened to a comedian recently. He's like, Nate Borgazzi, he's like, yeah, so I decided for my wife for Mother's Day, we'd plan something for her and dig a hole. And it turns out digging a hole is like the hardest thing any human could ever do, he says.
Yeah, it depends where you're digging it, yeah.
Yeah, true. If you're digging it in Northeast Ohio in the clay, you got a lot of challenge.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Well, Arnold, it has been spectacular talking to you. I really want to thank you for your time and sharing your perspective on architecture and design and the world. Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, this has been a very nice conversation. Thanks for having me on. Love to. Now I'm going to listen to it because I don't like to listen to myself, but I'm going to see if I can listen to what I sound like. But no, this has been a really nice conversation. And thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit of my life with you.
Been a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Arnold Swanborn of Co-Architects, Design Principal. I'm John Wheaton of the Creating Structure Podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a great day. We're signing off. We'll talk to you next time.